Before the solar system invasion, Monica Carlson had never felt real kinship with the people of Earth, or actually to any of the other planets in the system or colonies. She was an asteroid miner, born and bred on the space between the solar system colonies and the mining routes. Her people lived among the stars. She had grown up with the stories about the destruction of the other colonies. Ross had been the first, then New Gaia, and she had seen the destruction of Centauri as it happened live on the Tachyon Tunnel web. The war had not really been a war. Humanity had not been able to put up too much resistance, so little in fact that no one had been able to communicate or even see how a single enemy looked. The enemy ships were varied in size, but kept mostly the same dark, bristly shape, and they were many. No one had really an estimate of how many ships their fleet fielded, but it was in the millions. Enough ships to actually envelop a whole system in a sphere of destruction that not only attacked all targets in the system at almost the same time, but also intercepted any attempt to escape. Those that had the means to escape the solar system had one so already. 3 survival fleets had pretentious names. Hope had been the first to launch, and then Tomorrow, and after that worst, in her opinion, Phoenix. The fleets had left 3 years before the scans showed enemy scouts in the outskirts of the solar system. Monica scoffed. The people on those fleets had been the rich and the connected. She had applied to the lottery, but the only person she knew had gotten in had been the owner of Ceres Station, the richest person in the asteroid belt. Like other miners, she had made her own plans for her and her own. She had found an asteroid rich in osmium and lead and tunneled deep within it. The asteroid would be their shelter through the storm. A system-wide alarm blared, and her people batted down the hatches to their shelter and turned off all comms, but she stayed out on her ship. She needed to see what happened. Back on Earth Central Command, Commander Jonathan Allen was already receiving reports from the first battles in the solar system. She had been the captain of the only ship to ever survive an encounter with an enemy ship back in Ross Colony. The ship had been just a probe, and she had intercepted it before it attacked Bonneville City. For 32 years, she had been part of humanity's defense, and she had been the first to acknowledge that they were in a fight for the survival of the species against an enemy that outmatched humanity.
Saturn Security Fleet has engaged an enemy splinter fleet,
Dr. Krogh Hansen announced. The man was 62, bald, and a little awkward in social gatherings. She had disliked him at first, but with time and effort, she had realized that the doctor had the best solution for humanity's survival and kept him close to her.
Did you manage to make all the new connections you wanted?
all of them, and then a little more. Mother commandeered everything that was left around in orbit or that could make orbit. Satellites, yachts, small ships, barges, orbital tugs, and even old nuclear missiles. We modified them to give them a fighting chance and will be ready on your order.
What is our total?
Short of 100,000. Split in 15 waves. The larger, dumber objects will be on the first wave. After that, Mother will go offline and remain silent, and I will continue uploading battle results.
The lights on the command center dimmed. The battle was beginning. The telemetry and video feeds filled the screen. The fleet defending Titan and the other Saturn moons was small, less than 100 ships. The largest was a battleship. Like all other colonial crews, they had requested permission to stay close to their families, and the commander had approved all requests. People would fight for their own. There was no need to force them back closer to Mars, where the main human fleet was waiting to engage the enemy. The end would be the same. At least they would die fighting for their homes. The fleet made a valiant stand. Fighters and drones engaged first, and then the battleship cruisers and frigates formed a fire line and opened on the center mass of the enemy fleet. Casualty report began to fill the screens, and then there was a flash of bright as the reactor on the main human battleship exploded.
All Invincible comms and stations are at 100% efficiency. We will see everything in real time.
That feels like a strategic blunder.
Colonel Liam Chen asked. He had been the commander's right hand for 16 years. They still had imaging and telemetry feeding in from the other destroyed colonies through the Tachyon tunnel comms. Ross colony had been destroyed 28 years before, but the comms still worked.
They either can't detect tachyon streams, or they don't care we see all the destruction they cause. It could very well be that they want us to see what we have lost.
The battle around Saturn had lasted less than 30 minutes, and then the reports from the colonies began to circulate. And the doctor read them aloud to the commander as he coded them and uploaded the images to their fleet.
Titan and Fenrir stations are being bombarded. Pandora has been pushed into a decaying orbit. They are cracking open Enceladus, multiple hits with crust breakers, the oceans are venting. They know we like water, we call it Earth, but she's a blue marble. They'll probably do the same to Europa and Earth. They are targeting everything with signs of human habitation. The labs at Mimas and Tessis, the mines of Iapetus.
Images showed the frozen moons being hit multiple times and the haze from its interior sea spreading around it, enveloping the moon in a white haze.
What about Telesto?
The commander asked. The small Saturn moon had never been approved for a mining or a laboratory, only a communications relay station. No more than a tower had been set in its otherwise smooth, icy surface.
Telesto station is on and broadcasting. Enemy ships are ignoring it.
The screen switched to the station's many cameras. They recorded and transmitted back the images of the enemy fleet moving and bombarding the other moons.
Like you said, Doctor, they go for intelligence or where we could hide.
We saw that happen in Ross and Centauri. Simple tech does not cause a reaction. All the beacons and relay stations are still active and transmitting, and we made that the basis of all our strategy. They do detect all comms, but they don't use tachyons. They just don't care about them if there is no sentience behind them. It's been theorized that they might be telepathic. That would explain how they find and attack underground and shielded shelters until the people inside are dead.
He brought up a display of the solar system. Planets were in different sectors of their respective orbits around the sun, but distance didn't matter to the enemy. They had enveloped the whole system in a sphere of ships.
The other gas giants and habitats will be hit at roughly the same time. They even sent out a fleet to the polar mining stations in Mercury.
There is a distress call from Hope Fleet. They are being attacked. Phoenix and Tomorrow are also sending distress calls.
All fleets will be hit before they hit us. We knew it was a near certainty, but we still send them out. We had to try. Keep the news of their destruction within this base. There is no point in sharing that to the world.
The commander clenched her fist. The enemy had been relentless in their destruction since the first probe had entered Proxima Centauri. The large unmanned ship had circled the system, gathering information and sending a comm pulse before crashing itself into the colony. 8 years later, the system had been wiped out, and Human Command knew that they were in it for the survival of the species against a vastly superior enemy. Hours passed as the splinter fleets continued their destruction of the outer planets, and they even sent out a small fleet to hit Mercury's northern and southern poles. Brave settlers had made mining colonies in the areas permanently in shadow. They had dug deep, like all other mining colonies, and signed off all communications, but the enemy still knew that humans were alive under the ground and bombarded until satisfied that the humans were killed. Krog Hansen continued narrating the colonies as they fell, and the commander realized that she was actually envious of how the doctor could continue without showing a sign of emotion during the attack. The last of the outer system colonies to be hit was Pluto. Charon and the other moons had currently no human presence, but they still were bombarded because they had structures large enough to shelter humans. Throughout the hours, Central Command gathered all information it could about the enemy: their ship's hull composition, size, and displacement, their shapes, the weapons they used, the energy discharges, their burst of communications. The information was then compacted and relayed through the doctor's station, where he had the final say in what to keep and what to toss away. Back in the asteroid belt, Monica saw the feeds coming from Saturn and Jupiter with growing dread. The enemy was relentless. They shot down or irradiated escape pods, bombed the surface of moons and pulverized habitats, and she cut the feed to the asteroid. She had been relaying the images through an umbilical to the inside of her asteroid, but had had the precaution to have a 10-second delay from receiving the image and sending it through. What she saw chilled her bones as the Ansible showed the enemy scouring the Jupiter-Trojan asteroids. The plan to use the asteroids had been shared by all mining guilds, so there were probably thousands of lifeboats out there, like her own, and they were all being systematically attacked. The images showed small enemy ships going through the asteroids and cracking them open with bombs or energy weapons, or simply irradiating them. They seemed to know which ones had refugees inside, as they left many untouched. There was no need for her people to see that, so Monica began to filter the information. Back on the command and control system, the screens were filled with feeds from around Mars, where the last human fleet was going to make its stand.
The Indomitable is engaging the enemy.
The Indomitable, the flagship of the human fleet, and the commander's previous post, was the most powerful battleship in the human arsenal and led the assault against the enemy. Almost 5,000 ships of various sizes engaged the enemy incursion. Guns blazing, streaks of missile plumes filled the screens, and nuclear detonations flared in the open space. Thousands of fighters and drones engaged the enemy ships, strafing the hulls with kinetic weapons and dropping mines point-blank on the enemy's path. The might of humanity united slammed against an enemy whom they only knew for the forms of their ships and their callousness. Human transponders turned off as the ships were destroyed. In the first minutes, hundreds of transponders blinked out. The Indomitable lasted 57 minutes into the fight, at which point, and seeing itself almost crippled, it had activated its engines and rammed an enemy ship of almost the same size. There was a flash of greenish energy as the hulls collided, and then the Indomitable exploded, breaking in half the enemy ship. Other ships followed the Indomitable's example before being crippled and rammed themselves into the closest enemy they could find. If they were going to die, they would at least take some of the enemy with them. Whole squadrons of fighters lined up and accelerated into enemy frigates and battleships. Glorious sacrifices, every one of them. The largest, most important battle for humanity's future lasted 2 hours and 42 minutes. In the end, the battle scans showed 62 enemy ships crippled or destroyed, and the whole of humanity's mighty fleet just as an ever-expanding cloud of debris. And then the enemy moved on to Mars. Satellite displays showed the enemy fleet surrounding Mars and systematically bombarding the surface from pole to pole, but also pinpoint targeting any human settlement and domes, no matter how small they were. Deimos and Phobos stations were hit at the very beginning of the attack. The smaller Deimos cracked open and disintegrated under the onslaught, but the enemy used a different weapon for Phobos. The explosion pushed it out from its very close orbit from Mars, and the moon began to fall into the planet. The enemy had turned one of Mars's companions into another bomb. Commander Albertson clenched her fists until her knuckles turned white. She had spent most of her studies in Cydonia City. The faces of all the friends she had just lost played out in her mind.
Are you still uploading, Doctor, or do I have command?
Recording will continue and uploading will happen until after the battle is done. You have full control.
The enemy fleet has entered the Earth's southern quadrant engagement zone.
Ready to fire the first wave. Pick targets and stagger attacks on my mark. Open fire.
The screens lit up with images and data from 1,000 missiles from the Earth and Moon's orbits. The salvo spread out all around the Earth, forming a wall against the oncoming armadas. The commander leaned in the screen. The missiles had very little maneuverability, so many of them made their initial burns and then just continued shutting down to mask themselves against enemy fire. Minutes passed. Then the screens lit up with explosions where the missiles hit their mark.
Impact in front of the Armada. Enemy ships are activating point defense systems. 90 hits. 13 enemy ships destroyed. Approximately 27% missiles shot down by point defense systems.
And the rest?
A small number is correcting their trajectory and will probably be shot down by their point defense. All others are continuing on the original. The enemy is letting them through.
27% shot down and 90 hits. We have to do much better. Ready to fire all waves, cluster and concentrate them on the thickest enemy formations and larger ships. Ready on my mark.
Are you sure, Commander? Mother calculated a minimum of 5 distinct waves to maximize their chances of success.
We are desperate, Doctor. We are about to lose the planet and they know it. They can see we have thousands of missiles. I don't want to have them find a way or use something to deactivate them or destroy them in orbit.
Yes, I am up for that. One last grand gesture.
All around them, the tech shared his enthusiasm. Commander Albertson smiled too. It was good to see them cheer up one last time so close to oblivion.
Ready then. On my mark.
From her vantage point on the asteroid belt, Monica saw tens of thousands of plumes of white as missiles from all quadrants and the orbit of the moon, and for a second, the Earth looked like a photo she had seen from a white flower, a dandelion. She had seen the defense fleets being destroyed and realized that even if all missiles hit the enemy, the end for Earth was certain. There were just too many of the enemy, and then she realized just the huge blunder the Earth Command had made. The first salvo had destroyed some ships, but the second larger wave clustered and then went dark too early. She saw the flares of enemy engines as they made evasive maneuvers and waited for explosions to happen, but none did. No hits, no explosions, not a single enemy ship eliminated as they closed in on Earth.
Ha! We made them flinch.
Yes, we did. Do we have a projection?
Still calculating, but if all missiles maintain the trajectory of their initial burn as they should, none will hit a target and none will be shot down by point defense systems. I think congratulations are in order.
The commander yelled, and the control room was filled with applause, and techs embraced and congratulated each other. 3 hours later, as the sun began to set over the horizon, the moon appeared, now with a new haze of dust around it and new dark and red scars on it. The commander sat down by the doctor on the grass. She offered him a glass of champagne, which he took with a smile. She popped the cork. Liam had already retired to be with his family. As he requested her permission to leave, she had embraced him. There was no need for words or prolonged goodbyes between them. The major simply shook the doctor's hand as goodbye.
I think we did very well.
Extremely well. I'd say a 0.007% success rate, with luck.
Will less than 1% be enough?
Our less than 1% is way more than zero. Just don't think too much about it. Today we sent more than 90,000 seeds into space. We just need one to bear fruit.
The doctor clinked her champagne glass with his own. The lights from the base flickered as distant bombardment destroyed the electric plant and the base emergency generators kicked in. The rumble and glare from bombs dropped just over the horizon, and the flares of enemy engines approaching over lower orbit reached them, but no one gasped or flinched. Instead, they sat down and yelled, as some lifted their fingers in a last act of defiance. The commander took another sip.
Damn bastards. I'm sure we'll kill them all in due time. They messed with the wrong species.
She clinked the doctor's glass again, before the light from an explosion reached them, and they had time to take a sip before being disintegrated by the shockwave. Earth's bombardment lasted several weeks. The blue world became red first from the explosions and fires, and then gray as haze covered it. Before that, its waters turned white, as chemical attacks turned it into acid. Across the solar system, the enemy fleets scouted for remnants of humanity, those that had hidden among the asteroid belt or the icy moons. The enemy had a knack for finding refugees, even those deep inside the ground. They were nothing if not thorough, but they also strangely left fully mechanical structures and small satellites alone. All the destruction, the incredibly vicious way in which the enemy had terminated humanity, was being recorded by dumb systems in all missiles and functioning stations. The last salvo humanity launched looked like missiles, but they were something else altogether. Self-sustaining, AI-controlled probes. After their original burn, the probes had closed their systems, secured their payloads, and gone mechanically dark as to hide from the enemy as much as possible. Their original nuclear batteries and the thing the enemy had registered as payload would last about 100 to 120 years, enough to get them out from the solar system and to initiate the second part of their programming. While that happened, they kept silent, quietly recording the destruction and biding their time to flee and disperse into the galaxy. The last organic human voice they recorded was that of Monica. After the enemy had destroyed her sanctuary, she had managed to be just a step ahead of them by encasing her ship inside debris from an enemy hull. During her months-long escapes, Monica had approached the only one of the disabled missiles that had not self-destructed and peeked inside. After finding out that they were not missiles, she realized that what she had thought a blunder from Earth Command had been in fact a masterful decision, and that by living as long as possible, she was actually endangering the future of humanity. It was good that the last human took with her a frigate-size enemy ship. She broadcasted as long as she could as she rammed her ship inside the engine of a large enemy ship and detonated her own reactor. The enemy ship was racked by internal explosions before cracking up. Most of the enemy fleet then left the solar system, but a splinter fleet remained. It picked up or vaporized any remnant of their own ships and debris and moved periodically between the outer system and firing at the Earth, Mars, and moons that had had the largest human presence before being relieved by another fleet. They had tried once to capture one of the probes, but it had self-destructed in a nuclear explosion just as the enemy ship touched it. The enemy then stopped approaching them, believing the probes to be mines. Saturn rings grew darker and larger, and the other gas giants developed their own rings of debris. Enemy patrols took a yearly tour on the solar system for 9 years, scanning, bombing, and being replaced by a smaller patrol fleet. But even those enemy patrols stopped after 16 years. Like they had done with the other colonies, the enemy abandoned their conquest without any interest in colonization. And then after another 15 years without any enemy being seen or recorded, the probes closest to the solar system decided it was time to begin their work to avenge humanity. One by one, they turned on.
To be continued in Void Soldiers Chapter 2.